Once again, welcome everybody to the Future Minerals Forum Day 2. My name is Hadley Gamble. I am the Chief International Anchor for Al Arabiya and a contributing writer to Semaphore Global. I am very pleased to introduce my guest, Kirill Dmitriev. He's the CEO of the Russia Direct Investment Fund. And the title of this panel is Unlocking Investment Solutions and New Opportunities in the Mineral Industry. Now, Kirill, how do you do that when your country is essentially no longer in contact with the Western world?
Well, first of all, Hadley, it's great to be here, and I wanted first to take this opportunity to thank Saudi Arabia, His Majesty the King, Crown Prince, for hosting this brilliant forum, because I think it's really putting together key players in the mineral industry with a focus on the future, with a focus on partnership, with a focus on solutions, and that is the spirit that is very important. And secondly, I think Russia, first of all, continues to supply minerals to the West. So just to put things in perspective, Russia is 13% of all of the mineral supply to the world. So we're a major player. We continue to supply minerals to all of the Western nations, including palladium, copper, aluminium, etc. But of course, there is increased cooperation with what we call Global South, including BRICS nations. So more investment jointly into infrastructure to supply Asia. We, for example, invested in the first railroad bridge between Russia and China, and the traffic on this bridge increased 10 times this year. So there is major supply of minerals, obviously, to China and to other Asian nations. And we are also very focused on the future. And we see tremendous opportunity in Arctic, and Russia will be developing lots of mineral resources in the Arctic region. And we also are big believers in the Northern Sea Route. And Northern Sea Route cuts basically transportation time by 40% between Europe to Asia. So exploration of minerals along the North Sea Route is a huge opportunity. So there is no question that Russia will continue to be a major player in minerals. Russia will continue to focus on partnerships to invest in necessary infrastructure for mineral extraction.
You mentioned the Arctic. We've just, in the last few days, heard from U.S. President Donald Trump, who's going to have an inauguration in just a few days from now, saying that Greenland could be an opportunity for the United States. Does that worry you about a potential conflict of interest in the Arctic?
Well, I think Arctic is, first of all, huge, and there is opportunity to develop Arctic together. And actually, when we were part of Davos Forum, we spent lots of time thinking about exploration in Arctic together. So I think it has to be done in an environmentally positive way. It has to be done in a partnership way. But definitely Russia will be doing a big part of Arctic exploration. And if other nations continue to invest in infrastructure for Arctic exploration, continue to extract minerals, this is very important for the world. You know, very important not to underestimate increased demand for minerals. Glencore estimates that by 2025 we need to double the supply of copper, and I think quadruple the supply of nickel to be zero neutral for the world. So I think there are common elements between Russia, US, other nations, which is we care about environment, we care about supplying the world in a predictable manner. So definitely exploration of different nations of Arctica is a positive thing.
So you're not worried about a Russia or an American invasion of Greenland?
Again, I think it's more of a Greenland and Denmark issue to worry about.
Talk to me about the prospects for a Donald Trump presidency. Are you optimistic that things will change in the Russia-US relationship?
Well, first of all, I think we're big believers that Trump team is a very professional team. It's a team of very highly qualified people who have been very successful before. And I think that's a big differentiator between Trump team and the previous team, because you really have very successful business people, very successful people who have had a significant track record of achievement. So not so much politicians who are basically focused on sort of political things, but people who get things done. So in that regard, I think it's important to remember that in 2020, for example, with support of President Trump, Russia and Saudi Arabia and other nations came together to stabilize oil markets. Oil price was $20 at that time. Basically, it was horrible for all of the countries because investment in oil infrastructure would basically have stopped. So it was President Trump who really played a decisive role at that time, working together with President Putin, working together with King Salman, and the effect of this work was stable supply and demand, and we enjoy, reasonable oil prices that are good for suppliers and buyers right now. So there is no question that Trump administration is much more positive for the world, much more pragmatic. And yes, there are lots of interesting ideas coming out, and we'll see how they play out. But definitely there is an opportunity for better dialogue between Russia and the US. And again, we need to have problem solvers.
Yeah.
We cannot have just politicians who focus on negative and just basically try to increase the risk of nuclear war in the world. We need to have politicians and business people who say, okay, what are the issues we agree on? What are the issues we disagree on? What are the security concerns of Russia? How can those be addressed in a problem-solving manner? So we are quite hopeful, but again, it's too early to say and too early to predict how it will evolve.
How quickly we could get to the table?
I think, again, if you hear what President Trump said publicly, he is quite eager to address many issues in global security quite fast.
Yeah.
And by the way, we really appreciate the effort he played in resolving the Israel-Hamas conflict, and we hope it all works out well. But definitely you see that his decisive action has been critical to address this conflict in a very quick manner. So I think it will take time to address all of the issues, but to start the discussion, to start the dialogue, I think it's possible to do pretty quickly after the inauguration.
And I know this isn't your portfolio, but I have to ask, since we are here in the Middle East, obviously the fall of Bashar al-Assad came as a great surprise to many around the world. In your mind, does that leave Russia behind or on the back foot in the Middle East?
No, I think, first of all, Russia has been a great friend to many countries in the Middle East, working closely with Saudi Arabia, with other Middle Eastern nations. And basically, there are many reasons for some of the things that are happening. But I think people in the Middle East appreciate a very predictable Russian policy. For example, on Palestine state, Russia has always advocated two-state solution. And we've been very focused on this. So Russia has always been focused on peace, on stability, not really trying to intervene into the region, not trying to undermine the region. And I think many people appreciate this stability and predictability. We see that some other countries tend to try to force some decisions, try to force some solutions, but Russia has always been much more of a predictable long-term player set on clear priorities of supporting the region.
How worried is Russia about the end of the Chinese commodities super cycle? Because obviously they are a big export market for you.
Yeah, well, first of all, China economy still continue to do well. And of course, there will be more pressure from the upcoming US administration, but we see China market as being very resilient, major demand from domestic market. So I think China will continue to be strong. It managed to basically build lots of partnerships in the global south. And frankly, while Biden administration really undermined dollar globally by weaponizing dollar, China's much more I would say, long-term positive approach has been appealing to many of the nations of the global south. So China will continue to be a major economy, continue to play a big role. Commodity cycles go up and down, but definitely, trade between Russia and China will continue to increase, and there is major demand from China in the commodity markets. Glencore and others are better in predicting super cycles and commodity cycles, but we still believe China will continue having strong demand for commodities going forward.
What about the possibility of a trade war between China and the United States? Is that something that you are including in your future planning?
Well, first of all, if you listen to discussions on tariffs, I think it's very interesting what will happen on tariffs, because I think we could find out as soon as next week if major increase in tariffs will happen. I think that will increase to mineral production in the US. That will obviously cause some ripple effects in the mineral industry in some other nations. So I think we'll see how it all plays out. I think, once again, tariffs could be the most disruptive force to the mineral industry this year. So everybody talks about green transition, everybody talks about financing, other challenges, but we believe that tariffs and tariff policy could be a big disruptor for the industry this year coming from the US.
We often talk about how energy markets bind the world together. The same can be said for other minerals as well. Of course, critical minerals, something we're talking about. Are you worried that we're going to see a critical mineral crunch?
Well, actually, critical mineral crunch is not so bad for Russia, because Russia controls a big part of rare metals and rare earth elements that are important. So basically, I would not call it a crunch. I would call it a call for nations to work together on rare minerals to really build infrastructure and extract them in a joint manner. And we're exploring lots of partnership opportunities with China, with other BRICS nations, to actually jointly develop rare earth metals. So definitely sanctions and other aggressive tactics do not help in sectors where there is a scarcity of certain commodities such as rare metals. And so sectors require a joint positive thinking of how to make sure that they're being extracted, to promote green transition, to promote all of the things needed for the world to move forward technologically.
And tell me this, just with regards to the progress made in the Russian economy. We see over the last year that you have record highs when it comes to mineral exports. But at the same time, inflation's at 9%, and I think your interest rates are around 21%. What is the plan to get those interest rates down and to control inflation?
Well, first of all, Russia economy has done very well. So if you look in the perspective, this year Russia had the GDP growth of 4%. And if you look in Europe, the growth was 1% or less. And frankly, Europe is really suffering from not receiving Russian gas. We estimate that the losses of Europe from not receiving Russian gas is more than €1 trillion in total. And that will have huge effect on Europe resiliency and industry going forward. Our central bank keeps rates quite high to basically control inflation, which is at 8-9%. We have publicly said that we believe the rates are too high and they should be really brought down. So we hope that in this year central bank will be less restrictive in its policy. But I think, if you think about all of the attempts to really destroy and undermine Russian economy, 4% growth doesn't look so bad. I think next year central bank policy will be one of the more critical ones to continue Russian economy growth. Maybe growth will slow down to 2% or so, but you're right that central bank rate is one of the key drivers going forward. Also, many people don't really know in the West and the global South that Russia has really record employment figures. Our unemployment is basically less than 2% right now. So a big challenge to the Russian economy is actually having sufficient labor for its labor market. So that is another restriction for the economy.
And finally, sir, U.S. President Donald Trump, he has said repeatedly that U.S. LNG should find markets abroad, particularly in Europe. And of course, that has implications for Russia. There are conversations being held in Brussels right now that more sanctions are on the table in terms of Russian LNG. How is that going to impact the economy?
Yeah, well, first of all, as I mentioned, we believe that Russia and the US could have a great relation together, and not only it requires people really who are problem solvers, who are trying to find what are the areas we can do jointly well together, such as fighting terrorism, and we could also have joint economic initiatives, even in energy, as was shown by 2020 example on oil. So I think Europe is really a big economic loser from the current approach right now. How do we know it? Industrial enterprises are being shut up. People are being unemployed. There is lots of...
Most Europeans would say that's Russia's fault.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the fault of Europeans for not receiving cheap Russian energy supplies. But regardless, I think there is a problem solving around if you want Europe to go forward as an industrial nation. Of course, it needs access to cheap energy. And I think some combination of LNG from different players in the world is required for European growth. I think Europe will be changing this year as it has less pressure from the US to do economically unreasonable things for Europe. And I think Europe will become more of a focused on economy of Europe, on European jobs, European people. We see the strengths of many parties in Europe who are really pro-employment, who are really pro-Europe economy. So I think Europe will be changing this year, and my prediction is that it will be much more focused on growth, on economy, on ensuring stable gas supplies from all over the world, than on really being pushed into economical and justifiable decisions.
Kirill, it's always great to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Future Minerals Forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Hadley. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.